For those who, may not, know the ad council as much, I'd love for you to kind of talk about how you're approaching influencers and kind of what you guys look for when you run campaigns kind of from a success standpoint.
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me today. So for those who might not be familiar with the Ad Council, we are the national nonprofit that really brings together the resources of the marketing and communication industry for social good. So we're really that hub that connects, whether you're a brand or you're a media platform or you're an influencer, how can you take what we do to usually get people to buy a product or to trust a brand? How do we channel that towards getting people to make changes that are positive for our country and for themselves? So we're known for iconic PSAs like Smokey Bear or Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk, Love Has No Labels, and increasingly they're really 360-degree campaigns. So how do we also make sure that we have an organic social strategy, a PR strategy, that we are partnering with influencers, with partners like Influential. So we really make sure we're measuring that across a wide range of measurements. I mean, I think that's part of what sets Ad Council social good campaigns apart, is all that rich data that we have in our industry and our ability to measure and our ability to know if we're succeeding. How do we translate that to the social good space? So it isn't just the reach of our PSAs and clicks to the website and engagement on social and on the website. That's all important, but we also make sure that we're doing tracking surveys nationally to make sure we're changing behaviors. So we're measuring what are people's mindset around this issue, whether it's mental health or car seats or breast cancer risk. How do we make sure we're really measuring what people are thinking about that and what actions they're taking around that? So that's a key piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, that's it sounds great. It also sounds a bit overwhelming with all of the different, things that have been going on in the world. And, like I was mentioning in that video clip, we've seen that there's been this call on, agencies and brands to really kind of tackle some of these issues. People want to see a stance from partners that they're working with. And, we have seen this kind of increase in wanting to do social good campaigns, especially from an influencer and a social perspective. So, how, have you been tapping into kind of these influential voices to do social good, and kind of, how have you seen that shift from what you guys have been doing?
Sure. Influencers have become a bigger and bigger piece of our strategies, I would say. And especially, I know we'll talk a bit today about our recent efforts in the COVID space and to promote COVID vaccine education. We think influencers have a really important role to play in social good, partly because they are passionate about issues, right? They have different causes that they care about. We use platforms like Influential to help us identify, okay, who has already been talking about being a parent or mental health or health issues, and how do we then connect with them and say, we have the research, we know what moves the needle on this issue, we have a website you can drive to, we are not branded, there's nothing in it for us except that we're trying to move the needle on these issues. So we reach out to them and build these really powerful partnerships together, because if you go back to how I was talking about, we want to make sure we are changing mindsets and behaviors. Influencers have such a key part to play in that, in social norming. So, they are powerful because they don't only have the reach, but they have that credibility and that relatability and that aspirational piece of the puzzle. So I think when an influencer is posting and saying, here's why I care about this issue, or here's why I make sure my kids wear a helmet or use their car seats or whatnot, you get that kind of added weight of them being someone that people want to emulate. And one thing I also really love in working with influencers in this space is it becomes an echo chamber, but in a good way, where their followers want to engage on that topic too. And there's often that back and forth, and people will raise their hands and say, thank you for sharing that. That's so important that you did that. Or I do that too, or I'm going to start doing that. So I really love seeing that it isn't just the push out of the influencer saying their point of view. It becomes a conversation with their community, and often a cause that they want to continue to align with their brand. And we try to look for ways to give them opportunities to do that. So it isn't just one post about, here's my mental health awareness message because it's Mental Health Awareness Month, which it is right now. But also, how can we kind of make them ambassadors for an issue? How can we invite them to speak at panels? Can we pitch them to do some PR around their connection to this issue? Can we profile them on our own blog? How do we help cultivate their knowledge of that issue, but also all these different ways that they can engage their community around it being something they're passionate about?
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting you bring up a couple of important points that we've seen from our side, as well as this kind of authenticity. And I think sometimes people tend to be a little wary of, influencers taking partnerships or promoting things that might not be authentic to, their brand and kind of what they've cultivated. But I think it's kind of the opposite. I think that we've seen this growth in these voices wanting to partner with things that align with their audience that they know that they've spoken about in the past, and they're very passionate about. So I think, it's both the kind of that piece, and then obviously you were mentioning this conversation. Social is kind of one of these great, there are some negative aspects, but there is this great, ability to really change social conversation around these topics. And, you're getting these voices, and you're, like you're saying, you're getting comments from people that are, appreciative of them sharing, similar stories, and whether it is kind of, car seats or, social justice or things like that, you are kind of seeing this, amplified effect of people kind of normalizing conversation on social around these topics. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it can definitely be very powerful.
Oh, go on.
No, go ahead. I didn't know if you had any other kind of aspects.
It was just, it made me think when you were saying, the authenticity. Sometimes just because of the rules and regulations, the influencers have to do hashtag ad when they do a post with us. And it's funny because sometimes we'll be like, well, why did you hashtag ad this? You're just saying, that it's a good message. So I always make sure I ask them to also do hashtag PSA, because then that sometimes helps diffuse that a little bit, because yes, sometimes we know there's a little bit of sponsorship element to it, but it always comes from a place first of it being a really organic issue that they're passionate about, and then we marry that, and then sometimes there's just these regulations that make them have to put the ad on it, and that can drive a funny conversation.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think kind of, adding that layer of maybe someone that's already kind of organically spoken about similar topics, so it doesn't necessarily seem that, this one hashtag ad, and also building that kind of ambassadorship where they're not doing just one, standalone post, and, seeing multiples of those. But it is kind of a tricky case to play in where you're, you want to be, legal compliant, legal compliance is always wanting to get involved, but, these voices have to kind of mix that. But so kind of changing gears, I know that obviously, things are still in an interesting place. We're starting to see a bit of a comeback, but kind of what's been the biggest change since last year, and kind of how have you guys had to shift gears in terms of your marketing efforts?
Right. I mean, I think we'd all agree that this last year has been about basically every month you're shifting gears. We're finding gears we didn't know we even had before. I hope everyone has some nice vacations lined up this summer after the year we've all kind of weathered together across all industries, but I think definitely in this space. So I think that's definitely just a new capability we've built of like, how do we just pivot constantly? We're now, as I mentioned, really focusing on COVID vaccine education, but a year ago, we were really focused on introducing the public to the concept of social distancing and wearing a mask, and doing a lot of efforts around that. And the regulations changed every couple of weeks. And now with vaccines, the eligibility keeps changing, and what the barriers and concerns people have keep changing. So I think just a big learning for us this year has been stretching that muscle of pivoting quickly and of monitoring the conversation, using social listening and other kind of tools at our disposal to make sure that a campaign is never set it and forget it. It's a living, organic thing. And again, I think that's a big piece that influencers can play a role in, because there's so much nimbleness already built into just the world of social media, being able to create content quickly. They own their channels, they own their own brands and their content creation. And so the ways that we make these national PSAs that we film, and their broadcast quality, and we distribute them, and then they air on TV months and months later, that's great. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. And those can be more evergreen and kind of provide that air cover, the backdrop of the issue. But when it comes to, okay, we're seeing right now, fertility questions are trending around the vaccine. There's myths kind of popping up, misinformation spreading everywhere at all times. So how do we activate with influencers and other kind of more nimble voices to react in real time and make sure we're putting out that vetted, trusted information from these authentic voices that can react in a more nimble way? So definitely something we've been building out more and more this year. Another piece, I think, kind of building on the misinformation issue, is I think we've really expanded our definition of influence and who is an influencer. So it's another capability we've really been building at the Ad Council, is in addition to working with celebrities and social media stars, who else are the influential voices that can counteract some of that just the mass quantity of bad information that's out there, which isn't always anyone's fault. It's just the way the internet works. So how can we also be seeding conversations and again, taking information people can trust and know that it was vetted by the CDC, it's endorsed by the Ad Council. How can we push that out in more ways than ever? So we've really been building out what we're calling our ground game, where we're also looking at, okay, let's do events with the faith community, with leading faith leaders in conversation with each other. We actually have one happening tonight with I think 19 different speakers representing different kind of faith communities. We're looking at how do we activate more with civil rights groups and make sure that, again, we're partnering with folks like UNIDOS and the NAACP to have their speakers and their leaders doing these virtual events with us. We're looking at ways that we can activate with pharmacists and business leaders and barbershops. So again, I think just who has influence and how do we make sure that they have, from our research and from our relationships with the CDC and these other trusted organizations, that they know what to say, because often they want to use their influence for good. They want to help activate their communities as well. So how do we package up information in a way that they can easily distribute it, know what to say, know what works, have talking points, have social media assets and all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to bring up, obviously, I think no one wanted to grow as a marketer quite this way that we've had to, but influencers were a really great safety net for a lot of brands and a lot of partners that we work with, because you're right, you went from shooting high production commercials or digital assets to, what do we do now that everything's shut down? And the benefit is that a lot of these people have almost their own small production facilities at home. They have, high level, capabilities to produce this content. So it was very fortunate to quick shift and kind of have them to be able to produce content, like you were saying, quickly and very reactional to what was going on. And then, additionally, we too have seen this kind of growth in different verticals for influencers. So we had a lot of people come to us and are looking for frontline workers or people to own their own small business, or especially hard hit segments of kind of, the industry, and kind of how do we amplify these voices that may, not have been as, top of mind before, and kind of how do we tap into this? And you're right, I think that expands out of just, maybe the fashion focused influencer has really, grown across a number of profiles and has been very beneficial because they do have, very highly engaged audiences as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning, we were kind of talking COVID vaccine efforts, and obviously that's been extremely top of mind for everyone over the last, few months, and kind of state by state, how do we tackle this? And, it seems every day there's an increased challenge, with how do we approach this for different audience segments and things like that. So would love to kind of, have an overview of kind of how have you guys been tackling this? Obviously it's very expansive and there's a lot of different moving pieces. Would love to kind of see kind of how you guys frame that and what impact you've had to date.
Sure, absolutely. And I put my dog in the other room. You might hear him faintly barking in the background, but luckily at least I put him away. So we'll keep forging on. So in terms of our approach to the vaccine efforts, like as you said, it's hugely multifaceted, and I couldn't possibly do justice to all the different ways that we're tackling that. So to really kind of zero in on how that's shown up in the influencer space, it starts with kind of our campaign's umbrella platform, which was developed by the ad agency Pereira Odell. And the thrust of it is it's up to you. And it's kind of a play on words, right? It's partly about that choice, because we know it's such a personal issue. It's a medical issue. It's been somewhat politicized, unfortunately. But ultimately, it's something that no matter how much credibility an influencer or an organization might have, it can feel like overstepping for someone to say, you should get the vaccine. So we deliberately kind of made it a bit of a softer entrance into that conversation. But then the play on words, of course, is that also it's up to you, like being able to get back to all these moments we miss. It does kind of depend on people getting vaccinated, and you could be a part of that. And so ultimately our goal is vaccine education. So driving people to resources to make the right decisions for themselves and their families. And I think that's also helped us gain entry with influencers who, particularly in communities where there are higher levels of mistrust and concern around the vaccines, to have that kind of softer angle in, I think has given us a lot more opportunities to say, we're not telling you have to tell your followers to get vaccinated. You can actually be candid with them about, here's the questions I had, here's the kind of journey that I went through to feel comfortable with it. And now I'm encouraging you to go get information as well. I like how you mentioned before, like the frontline workers, because that's kind of been a piece of this too. So to inform this effort and what our influencer strategy would be, we did a lot of research. Everything we do, you probably heard me say research so many times, like it really is the backbone of our approach. And so in our research, we were really looking at who has credibility on this topic that is so politicized and is so personal, and who has the reach on this topic. And we kind of plotted that against an XY axis. And so we found medical experts have the most credibility, especially your personal doctor. They're like the one person who can tell you, go get the vaccine, and you might listen to them. But of course you can't, it's hard to activate them on kind of a national scale. And then of course, celebrities and social influencers had a ton of reach on this topic, but when it came to this medical breaking news, new technology, like people didn't, especially at first when the vaccines were first available, didn't really want to hear from celebrities on this topic. So we married the two. We figured out, how do we have fact creators? Let's partner with doctors, particularly doctors in communities of color and in, communities that skew more hesitant toward the vaccine. How do we partner with them to create content about the vaccine, answer people's questions, and then pair them up with these more traditional influencers to help get the word out? So it looks a couple different ways. Sometimes it's literally, let's have them in a panel conversation together. We did a conversation between two legends where Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Dr. Kazmikia Corbett, who actually helped develop the RNA technology behind the vaccines, they had a conversation together, kind of just talking about hesitation in the community, how the vaccines were tested. So using his name and his reach and her expertise and credibility. And then we also created a fact library, we call it, where we had a bunch of doctors just film themselves direct to camera in their own offices and homes, answering questions about the vaccines that they hear from their patients. And then we had celebrities and influencers, okay, just go through that library. What resonated with you? What were the questions you had? And did a doctor answer that here? And can you share that to your social followers and bring in that emotional piece as well? Layer in, why was getting the vaccine important to you, or what questions did you have? So kind of matching that, the emotional piece with the medical piece. So that's really kind of driven the whole framework as fact creators and fact amplifiers, and how we can use both pieces that are equally important in a cohesive way.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, something kind of popped into my head while you were talking about this, is that, you were saying there is a very strong level of opinion on the vaccine and a number of these topics that you guys work across. And when you're doing research and campaigns are running, do you guys ever dive into kind of social listening and sentiment and kind of use that to shape how you kind of further the campaign? Mm-hmm. Is that obviously, you're kind of aware going in that there's probably going to be some level of negative sentiment and kind of trolling that exists, but how do you guys kind of utilize that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have an in-house analytics team, and they're always looking at that and reporting out. And then in general with this topic, it's so in the news that we're also making sure we're just looking at, what are the themes that are emerging? What are the New York Times headlines of the week? What are the questions coming up in the White House's press briefings? So really kind of mapping that to not just the sentiment around, how are people responding to the content we're pushing out, but more broadly, what are the kind of emerging themes, trends, misunderstandings that might be out there. So again, I think that just gives us that ability to be nimble and to react. I mentioned like the fertility myth has been growing, or now that vaccines have been approved for kids between 12 to 15, that's become a really important segment. How do we reach parents who maybe they were comfortable getting the vaccine themselves, but they have different questions? Okay, my child is still growing. My child might be at less risk of COVID than I was. What's the risk benefit analysis there? So then we're able to look into our fact library and see, do we have content we can serve up and kind of push out to our influencers that addresses those emerging themes? Or do we need to go quickly film something now? Again, this beauty of everyone's at home, everyone has a camera. I have no idea what this might have looked like 10 years ago if we were all trying to live this life now that we're in. But yeah, it just gives us that ability to understand, how do we react in real time and make sure people have the information they need in this moment, because we all know the week we're in this week is not who we were a week ago, is not who we were the week before that.
I think it's really interesting that you bring this up too, because, a lot of times we will have partners that might be a little bit hesitant on how certain things are going to be received on social. And there's this always, goal to have, very low negative sentiment. And obviously you don't want something to be, taken in the wrong light. But I think that, measuring social conversation and measuring sentiment across campaigns is a really great way to kind of, adapt your campaign. Like you're saying, do we shift assets? Do we, in a future campaign, do we do different targeting? How do we approach this? And I think that people shouldn't always be so concerned about having a campaign that's 100% positively received, because you want to test and learn, and you want to see how do you adapt your strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that overall campaign platform has really served us in this regard, that we kind of went out, a key part of our messaging is it's okay to have questions, and we're not here to tell you anything in absolutes. Like, we'll let the medical experts do that. They can say, yes, it's safe. Yes, it's been tested. But I think, again, that's given us a lot more flexibility in just going in with that mindset that, yes, people will have questions. And from the beginning, we were really clear about defining our target audience, that we knew there were people when the vaccines were first available who were first in line, refreshing their browsers at midnight, ready to get that shot. I was one of them. I was on the phone with my parents, like, okay, you're eligible in 2 minutes. I'm going to get you the appointment. So we were really clear about, we're not trying to reach those people. We're trying to reach the people who have questions, who are waiting and seeing. We're kind of just thinking, if they want to wait and see a couple months, can we maybe help them feel more confident? So maybe they only want to wait and see a couple weeks, can we kind of just shift them in that funnel? So again, I think if all you're hearing is positive feedback, that's nice, but it might mean that actually your targeting, your messaging is slightly off, because you're not reaching the people who aren't just that positive echo chamber. And so again, I think behind every ad council campaign, that's really top of mind for us, is how do we reach that movable middle or the skepticals, so that we aren't just preaching to the choir, because that isn't a good use of anyone's resources.
Yeah, that's also a really interesting point in terms of targeting. So outside of just COVID, there were a number of challenges that kind of arose last year. So we had social injustice, we've had a lot of, inclusivity issues, and a lot of different things come up. So you guys kind of span a number of different initiatives. Like you were saying, outside of just topical things that arise, there's always kind of ongoing initiatives that you're coming up with. How do you guys kind of balance, and prioritize things as they come up, with all of these different initiatives that you're trying to run?
Sure. First of all, the Ad Council always has about 30 to 35 active campaigns. So while COVID vaccines has been a huge focus this year, and COVID safety was a huge focus last year, we're always kind of running the gamut and mindful of different swaths of the American public need different things. So the same folks who might not be our target for the vaccine messaging might be our targets for the car seat messaging. And so it's okay to have kind of multiple things going. A couple different things on how we prioritize. One is we have criteria, like written, formalized criteria. And I think that's really important. If any brand is thinking about, we want to take on more social good, it all has to start with, okay, well, who are you as an organization, and what does it make sense for you to take on? So some of the criteria that we use, for example, is that it needs to be national in scope, and affect like a significant population of the American public. If we drill down into a population that's too narrow, we just might not be the right fit, because we are national in our kind of partners that we bring to the table. Other criteria for us is it needs to be non-political, because we are a 501c3 organization, it's a tax status thing. So while some of the topics might be political, the call to action needs to be something that isn't about, now go vote on this issue. It needs to be more about, something kind of further up the funnel than that. And then another criteria, for example, is it something where an individual can, again, take a specific asset, take a specific action, change a mindset around this particular issue. So it needs to be very individual focused ultimately. That's just examples of our criteria. I think, every organization might have their own that goes back to their values or their audience and what kind of changes they want to make. Another piece of our criteria that I think is important for everyone is we look at what's the landscape around this issue, because we don't want to be duplicative of anyone else's efforts. So if there's already a bigger topic, like let's say gun violence is a big topic that a lot of different organizations are taking on, we drill down into what's the unmet need here that the Ad Council's model can uniquely fill. So in that case, we have a safe gun storage campaign. So it's not about saying have a gun or don't have a gun or vote this way on gun legislation. It's about, if you have a gun in your home, you as an individual need to make sure it's securely locked and stored unloaded. And then we're raising awareness around, incidences of gun violence in the home that are unintentional. So that's, again, I think just important to, we can all go further when we go together. And so we look at, if we don't have our own niche that we want to carve out, are there other organizations already working on this that we can team up with and we can amplify each other's efforts? Or in the case of COVID vaccines, we've created kind of that broader platform, that's up to you platform. And we've invited so many partners into, we're calling it our big tent of, okay, Verizon, you want to tackle this, ABC, you want to tackle this, the Muppets want to make a PSA. Well, what if we all use that same branding and that same messaging that you can then tailor for your own platforms so it resonates with your audiences, but again, is drawing on that research that we've already done and that brand equity that we're already building and this resource that we've created. So I think that's kind of a big takeaway that I'd encourage everyone to think about too is, we don't all have to go do our own thing. We can all sing from the same songbook and lift up each other's efforts, or identify where is there something that needs to get done that isn't being done, and what can your organization specifically do to fill that need.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought that up because, another part of the clip that we showed at the beginning was kind of, a lot of consumers have really looked to brands to take a stance or to make efforts in specific, areas of everything that went on last year. I think the challenge from the brand side is kind of, how do we make this entry into it, and leaning on you, who, like you're saying, you have a lot of existing research, you've done a lot of campaigns within certain segments of kind of this social good movement that, it's great for them to kind of lean on you as kind of this entry into, potentially growing their involvement in various, social good causes.
And we always recognize too that we aren't the issue experts. So we also make sure that anything we're tackling, as I keep mentioning for the vaccine project, we're working with the CDC, with the HHS, but in other cases, we partner with nonprofits or government organizations that they know the issue inside and out. They know car seat safety, they know breast cancer risk, and then we're the ones who marshal the resources of the industry. So again, no one has to try to save the world on their own. There's so many organizations that are passionate about these different emerging issues. It's just about finding the right partners who can help you make an impact. I do want to go back to what you mentioned before around, racial justice and emerging themes like that. Everyone, I think, is renewing their interest in tackling. And that's definitely something that's been top of mind for us. We have existing campaigns that we're already tackling that. But I think when we talk about prioritization, another thing we keep in mind is, how can we bake this in across other issues that we're trying to tackle? And so I think a lot of the most pressing issues in America often deal with inequity and racial injustice. And so if we're going to be the organization that says we tackle the most pressing issues facing our country, we always kind of layer in that piece. So how are we working with the right partners, with the right experts? How are we being mindful of which audiences we're trying to reach, and kind of baking that in? So again, in our vaccine efforts, it's really about working with a wide range of different agencies and different partners, so that we don't just have one blanket national campaign about getting vaccines. We're really looking at how can we make culturally resonant content and partner with the right influencers that can also help us reach in the right way different subsegments of the population and make sure that they're being served, they're being heard, and given the inequities of how COVID has affected different communities, that's really been top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen from our side that this, everything that's gone on has really cast a spotlight in wanting to make sure that you're working with creators that span a number of different audience segments that are able to give various viewpoints. And that's, again, going back to that authenticity kind of element and wanting to make sure that you're reaching, broad and things like that. Before we kind of jump into our Q&A session, one thing we kind of like to lean into is, looking out over the next, the second half of the year, what's one thing that you're really looking forward to from a work perspective and kind of more on a personal side?
Sure. On a personal side, I am finally going to get married. I was supposed to get married March 2020, so you can tell how that worked out. Looking forward to this November, being able to celebrate without masks and safely and hug everyone and see a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time. And then work-wise, I think, the vaccine initiative, it's not going away anytime soon. And it's been interesting because in some ways, we got like the people who are easy to convince, for lack of a better word. And so now it's really drilling down into those specific subsegments and really understanding the barriers and really doing these highly targeted activations to reach different populations. So I think that work is just going to continue to evolve and grow. And then eligibility, we expect that we'll be targeting parents more and more over the year. So hopefully by the end of this year, kind of the whole vaccine push might be behind us all and we're all vaccinated and ready to party, but who knows? I think, still a lot of open questions there. And then we're also, as I mentioned, we always have like 30 different active campaigns, and some areas for focus for us are going to be kind of, okay, the bigger picture impacts of the pandemic as we all kind of emerge from it. Mental health is really going to be top of mind. So we have a number of initiatives around the mental health space. We actually just launched one a couple weeks ago to help parents and caregivers talk with their middle schoolers about mental health. It's called Sound It Out, and it's all about using music to open up conversations with kids. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there with engaging influencers and artists to continue to push that out. And then we're working on some work from veterans' mental health. We have young adult suicide prevention. So again, really kind of different tailored approaches to different communities that we're all impacted big picture, but we're all impacted in different ways and we all have different needs. So making sure we're lining up the right kind of partners and approaches to address that.
Well, hopefully the wedding goes off without a hitch in November. You had terrible luck in November.
I'm like, if it doesn't work out this time, we're just going to the courthouse. I'm not rescheduling this for a fourth time. I'm not going to try to fit into my wedding dress again. We're just going to call it and just sign the paperwork.
Oh God, that's probably the worst part of all of it, trying to get back into post-pandemic shape. Now that we've all been living off of Postmates for a year plus, but so we did have a few questions come up from the audience. So I'm going to dive into the first one. First question, how important is influencer marketing in your marketing strategy and messaging, and how do you identify who is the right fit?
Sure. I would say for every campaign, influencer marketing plays a different role. So with some of our campaigns, it's a bigger priority than others, and that often depends on the issue and the audience. So I mentioned our young adult suicide prevention campaign. That's been one where influencers have played a huge role because obviously if we're trying to reach 18 to 20 somethings, that's just such a key way into reaching them. They don't watch as much, traditional broadcast TV and other kind of traditional media. So that's been a huge piece of that strategy. And for the vaccines effort, it kind of runs the gamut. So it really depends on the campaign, what their audience is. And then also, I think that's mental health is a great example of one where there's such a great fit, where so many people have been passionate about this topic, have been publicly kind of talking about their own struggles or just what they're seeing in their youth cohort. So it's been a really easy way, again, to use platforms like Influential to see who's talking about this, who reaches our audience, how do we then find the way in. Because that's usually how it starts, is we try to find influencers who are already passionate about a given topic, or who really mirror the audience. The car seat one is the example I think of for that, where not a lot of people are already posting about car seats necessarily, but are they parents of young kids who are kind of generally sharing parenting tips and things. So again, that can be a way in either way, whether it matches the audience or is passionate about the issue. Those both give us a way in. Mm-hmm. Or both.
Our next question, and I think this is a really interesting question, are you going to be adjusting your marketing and digital transformation initiatives over the next 2 to 3 years based on what you've seen in 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one reason I keep talking so much about our efforts in the vaccine space is partly because we're really excited about what we can learn from our approach here to inform our work moving forward. So as the Ad Council, we've been talking about, even when there isn't a global pandemic that's kind of upending, kind of dominating everything in everyone's lives, can we look at some big picture issues like mental health and think about how do we put more of our resources towards one issue and then activate that in a couple different ways. So with different audiences and with different strategies, but all kind of toward a bigger theme that's kind of emerging in our country. So I think we're going to take what we learned from vaccines and apply it in spaces like mental health and others. And I think just one thing that's been really exciting in that focus in 2020 and 2021 so far, I can't believe we're almost halfway through 2021, has been exactly that of like, how do we work with multiple agencies and think about different audiences under one umbrella issue. And so I think we're learning a lot about how we coordinate between our different agencies and identify their different roles and make sure everyone knows, okay, here's your lane, but here's how your lane can inform this other agency's lane, so that we're not even internally duplicating each other's work or stepping on each other's toes, but rather learning from, oh, here's this really cool idea that our agency that is activating in the faith space has been doing. Can we marry them with what we're doing in the influencer space and bring an influencer to take part in that event? And then can we push that out through PR? And oh, maybe this isn't just an event for the Hispanic community. Maybe we make this a multicultural event and we also bring in some speakers from the Black community. So there's just been so much kind of opportunity when we tackle one issue in so many different ways, but also a lot to kind of learn and figure out that goes with that.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting too, because I think we won't know until we kind of get back into opening things up that there are going to be all of these residual effects, like you're mentioning. Mental health will kind of become, you know, there'll be a bigger spotlight on it. We'll have more people commuting and driving, so child car seat safety will probably become an issue again, and drunk driving and things like, you know, there are all these things that are kind of going to creep up as we kind of go back to what will be a more normal life.
Mm-hmm. I know. Who knows what the next couple of years will hold, but it can only get better from here, right?
Here's to hoping. So our last question, has the crisis forced modifications from short, mid, long-term goals, and how are you measuring success based on changes in consumer behavior?
Mm-hmm. Sure. In terms of changing short, mid, long-term goals, the exciting thing is I think we were already going in that direction of how do we take one issue and support it in a couple different ways. That was already something that we've been exploring and starting to think about how to staff. And the pandemic just kind of forced us to explore that more quickly than we'd planned. But it's been kind of a great opportunity to get that hands-on experience and to start trying out that model. So I don't think it's dramatically changed our goals so much as accelerated a direction that we were already exploring and going into. And I think it's also been a great test case of, again, we really want to be that hub for the industry, and in many ways we already are, but I think the more we focus in on fewer issues that people are already looking for ways to activate around, then it kind of, again, it's been a great learning experience of, okay, let's really try this umbrella approach where we give so many partners the opportunity to create their own content, but we all are sharing the same message fundamentally. It's again just kind of accelerated our exploration of that. So I don't think it's changed so much as accelerated. And I know we'll all kind of catch our breath after this and then step back and say, okay, now what are our new goals and what are we forging toward from here? We keep saying when we catch our breath, when this is over.
We were talking about this before, kind of how we're like looking forward to vacation time, because I think for a lot of marketers, we've just been working around the clock, and especially from a social perspective, not only all of the challenges that have come up, there have been platform changes and things that have gone on. So it seems like we've been through so much, we've been working all the time, that we're all working toward this one period where we're all going to take, you know, a week off at some point and actually unplug for it.
And I like where I'm practicing what we preach. You know, I mentioned May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So the Ad Council is actually giving us 2 days off next week to make a long Memorial Day weekend. Let's all reset a little bit. So I think it's important for organizations to be thinking through that lens too of, you know, we all have such great ambitions, but if people start burning out, we won't be able to achieve them. So how do we make sure we're supporting our staff with the resources and messaging that we want to inspire the public with?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, you know, a lot of people have been looking